Picture 7 of the most physically imposing men ever assembled for a single film: a professional bodybuilder, an NFL player, and a man who would go on to govern the state of Minnesota, all pointing their weapons into a jungle. They fire everything they have: miniguns, assault rifles, grenades. For a full 2 minutes they tear the forest apart, and when the smoke clears, the jungle stands exactly as it did before. Nothing falls, nothing dies, every round disappears into the green. That moment sits at the heart of Predator, and most people watching it take it for a cool action sequence, which is exactly what director John McTiernan wanted them to think. Because what he actually staged was an act of deliberate sabotage. A studio executive had spent weeks pushing McTiernan for more gun footage, more firepower, more of what the director privately called gun pornography. And McTiernan's answer was to deliver a scene of such unlimited theatrical violence that it accomplished nothing at all. Every bullet wasted, every muscle flexed, for an audience of trees. That's what this film is really doing. And tonight I want to show you why it matters. Not as film theory, but as something you've already felt in your own life, in your own way. Because if you've ever spent a long time doing everything right, staying composed, holding it together, staying strong, and still felt like something was closing in anyway, then this film already knows you. Let me show you who these men are first. Because the film needs you to believe in them completely before it starts taking them apart. The premise is simple, and almost deliberately thin. Dutch, played by Schwarzenegger at the absolute peak of his action hero years, leads a team of mercenaries into a Central American jungle to rescue a hostage. CIA operative Dillon, an old friend, has arranged the mission. The team trusts Dutch. Dutch trusts the mission. They drop in, they do the job, and they start heading home. That's when the killing starts. Not fast, not frenzied, but one by one and methodically, from the canopy, leaving almost no trace at all. Whatever hunts them watches first, studies each man in turn, and waits with a patience that doesn't read as animal. The jungle itself functions as a character here. McTiernan shot on real location in Mexico, and the density of it, the sounds, the shadows, the way the camera gets swallowed by green, creates a kind of claustrophobia no studio set could manufacture. You feel watched. You feel enclosed. You feel the team's confidence beginning to curdle from the inside out. These are men who have walked through every danger the human world offers and come out the other side intact. They carry enough firepower to level a village and move with the relaxed ease of people who have genuinely never been outmatched. The film spends its entire first act earning that sense of comfort, building it carefully and deliberately, so that when it starts to erode, the erosion registers somewhere in your chest before your brain catches up. The team reads as a gallery of very specific performances. Blain, played by Jesse Ventura, carries a minigun he calls Old Painless, and walks through the jungle as though the jungle chose the wrong day. Mac, played by Bill Duke, shaves his face with a straight razor while staring at nothing, holding himself at some private, difficult distance. Billy, the tracker, senses the thing in the trees before anyone else can, goes quiet and still, and says the line that the rest of the team doesn't want to hear. There's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no man. Nobody believes him. They're all still thinking in terms they understand, which is the mistake the film spends 90 minutes taking apart. And the reason the deaths land as hard as they do comes down to something the film arranges almost invisibly in the opening act, something most viewers never consciously register. Here is the detail most people miss about Predator, and it has nothing to do with the creature's design, the body count, or the effects work. It's about how Dutch wins. By the final act, everyone else on the team is dead. Dutch is alone, injured, and the alien hunters circle somewhere in the trees. What follows is one of the stranger arcs in mainstream action cinema. Schwarzenegger, the man whose body had come to represent 1980s invincibility itself, strips everything away: the weapons, the vest, all of it shed, and then he falls into a river, and when he surfaces, he's coated in cold mud that masks his body heat completely. The Predator, which hunts by thermal vision, can no longer find him. Dutch, this icon of physical power, turns invisible the moment he stops performing strength. He wins not with a bigger gun. He wins by becoming nothing, by letting go of every symbol of the kind of man he was supposed to be. And when he finally has the Predator at his mercy, he doesn't finish it. He steps back, lets the creature die on its own terms, and the Predator, recognizing something in that gesture, arms a self-destruct device and gives Dutch just enough time to clear the blast radius. They let each other go. McTiernan was direct about this in interviews. The whole point, he said, was the impotence of all the guns. He had no interest in making an advertisement for firepower. He wanted to make a film about the things firepower cannot do, and what it cannot do, it turns out, is protect you from something that sees past the performance. Look at how each man dies. Hawkins, the one who uses humor as armor, gets pulled into the dark mid-joke. Blain, the embodiment of brute force, dies silently and mid-swagger. Mac, whose entire identity runs on controlled menace, unravels into uncontrolled rage and runs headlong into nothing. Dillon, a man whose every move has been calculated self-interest, dies buying time for someone else, which is the only unperformed thing he does in the entire film. Each of them dies in the exact mode of the mask they'd been wearing. And then there's Billy, the one most people remember wrong. He gets filed away as the stoic Native American tracker, a type, a function, but Billy is the character who sees through everything first. He knows what's coming long before anyone else admits it. He laughs, genuinely and with real delight, at a terrible joke, which is the one brief crack in the stoicism, small and human and surprising. And then at the log bridge, he stops walking. He tells the others to keep moving. He drops his radio, then his rifle, draws his machete, and cuts his own chest, not to show toughness but to make himself visible to the thing that has been hunting them. He is done pretending. The screams that follow play off screen, which is the most unsettling choice in the film, because it means you have to imagine them. Billy understands before Dutch does that you cannot fight what's hunting you by becoming more of what you already are. You have to stop. You have to be seen for what you actually are. That's the film's buried thesis. Predator is not a survival story. It's a story about what happens when everything you've built to make yourself formidable becomes the exact thing that makes you a target. The film has to earn that thesis, and the way it earns it is stranger and more deliberate than it first appears. The strangest technical achievement in Predator is one nobody gives it credit for. By the time the killing starts, you already care about every one of these men. That shouldn't work. There are 7 of them, the film moves fast, and you get no backstory, no long scenes of vulnerability or domesticity. What you get is a helicopter ride and a jungle walk. And yet the first death lands with real weight. Because the film understood something that most action movies miss entirely. You don't need to know someone's history to feel their absence. You just need to have seen them alive. McTiernan shot the team with a specific physical ease that communicates years of shared history without a single scene explaining it. Watch the first act and notice the half-conversations, the shared references, the callousness that functions as intimacy in military shorthand. Blain and Mac carry a shorthand between them that suggests years the film never shows. When Blain is killed and Mac is the one to find him, Bill Duke holds the stillness of a man who has lost the only person he allowed himself to be close to, and the film gives that moment just enough space to breathe before moving on. The jokes do work too, and not despite being crude but because they're crude. They're the specific social currency of men who've decided that showing vulnerability is more dangerous than hiding it. The terrible joke Hawkins keeps telling, the one that only Billy eventually laughs at, and that moment when Billy laughs, this stoic, watchful man suddenly ambushed by a bad punchline, is the clearest window into any character in the film. Late to the joke, genuinely delighted, completely unguarded for 2 seconds. Shane Black, who played Hawkins and who would later direct his own entries in the franchise, improvised many of his character's lines on location, and McTiernan overheard him telling that particular joke to a crew member at lunch, and immediately decided it was going in the movie, because it was exactly right. It said something true about how people use humor around things they can't process. Jesse Ventura, who plays Blain, served as a real Navy SEAL before his career in entertainment. Bill Duke brought an intensity to Mac that ran largely unscripted, and that shaving scene, the straight razor moving with unsettling precision while his face holds nothing, came from Duke working out what his character was doing with his hands while everything else collapsed inside him. Several cast members carried actual Vietnam War experience, and McTiernan wanted that. Men who moved like men who'd been in the real thing. The result is that each death lands in a different register. Hawkins goes mid-sentence, pulled from behind, and the shock of it comes partly from the fact that you were still in the joke. Blain dies standing, which suits him. Dillon loses his arm and finds in his last moment that he's capable of something he never was before. Poncho, wounded and refusing to show it, dies with someone else's name in his mouth. You miss each of them differently, which is considerably harder to arrange than it sounds. There's another question running through the film in parallel, one operating entirely in sound and shadow and in what the camera refuses to show you. Running underneath everything in Predator is a question the film never states out loud. How do you make something frightening when you can't show it? For most of the first half, the creature appears only as a shimmer, a heat-haze distortion moving through the trees, a suggestion of something the jungle accommodates but doesn't acknowledge. Alan Silvestri's score keeps a low, percussive pulse running underneath scenes that should feel routine, so that even the calm stretches carry a low hum of dread. You don't know yet what you're afraid of. You just know you are. The absence of the creature came, originally, from a production disaster. The first costume was an entirely different design worn by Jean-Claude Van Damme, who quit the production after days in the Mexican heat, and the shutdown that followed forced a complete redesign. What Stan Winston built as a replacement, with the dreadlocks, the mandibles, and the layered armor, became one of the most recognizable creature designs in cinema history, but the months-long delay also forced McTiernan to shoot extended footage without the creature present at all. He spent that time getting very good at the shape around an absence. The thermal point-of-view shots do something specific. They show you the team as the Predator sees them, heat signatures, color-coded and indistinct, stripped of faces and names and personality. Men you've spent 40 minutes getting to know are suddenly rendered as targets, and the switch in perspective is brief and quietly disturbing. And then there's the sound, that low, wet, rhythmic clicking that communicates intelligence and patience rather than hunger. Whatever this thing is, it isn't frenzied, it has a system, it has been here before. The films that understood this approach before Predator, Jaws and Alien and The Thing, all shared a confidence in withholding, a trust that the viewer's imagination would build something worse than any image the camera could deliver. Predator earns its place in that company. The shimmer in the trees is scarier than the monster. What Billy hears in the forest is scarier than what eventually emerges from it. By the time the Predator removes its mask for Dutch in the film's strangest scene, you've built the creature into something vast and unknowable, and what's underneath is grotesque and specific, more disturbing for being so detailed. Dutch's response, "You're one ugly motherfucker," isn't bravado. It's a man reaching for the only language available to him when the thing he's been afraid of finally has a face. Naming it doesn't make it smaller. Naming it, the film knows, sometimes makes things larger. The film's strangest and most quietly affecting scene, though, isn't a kill. It's what happens when two very different hunters finally look at each other clearly. The detail that stays longest after everything else in Predator has faded is a simple one. The Predator plays fair. Anna, the captured gorilla, walks through the entire film unharmed, because she's unarmed, and the Predator won't touch her. The creature hunts openly, within a code it holds to even when that code costs it the advantage. When Dutch lies helpless and half-drowned on the riverbank, coated in mud and invisible to thermal vision, the Predator could find him by sound, by instinct, by waiting. Instead it walks away and leaves him to recover. And at the end, when Dutch has disabled its weapons and the Predator still has options, it takes off its mask, removes its armor, and faces Dutch as something closer to an equal. It handicaps itself. It chooses to lose the right way rather than win the wrong way. Dutch registers this. The moment before their final confrontation, something shifts in his expression as he watches an alien creature perform a deliberate act of fairness. The fear gives way to something that looks more like recognition. When Dutch steps back from the dying creature and lowers the boulder, he's reciprocating. He saw the system the Predator operated within and chose to honor it, and two beings at the absolute limit of what they can understand about each other manage something that resembles respect. Nobody who talks about Predator talks about this scene. The conversation about the film stops at the guns, the muscles, the one-liners, and almost never reaches this quieter exchange at the end. Two figures deciding without words that there's a way to do even this well. McTiernan saw the Predator as a tragic figure, an apex hunter from a civilization advanced enough to cross galaxies, reduced to collecting skulls. There's a loneliness in that image, a creature of extraordinary reach, traveling distances that should be incomprehensible, and all of it in service of what amounts to a very elaborate performance of its own worth. The film doesn't labor this point. It doesn't need to, but it sits there under the surface, patient as the creature itself, waiting for viewers who are watching closely enough. Beneath all of that, the creature and the kills and the code of honor runs a simpler story about betrayal, about what happens when the mission you gave yourself to turns out to have been a lie from the very beginning. One layer of Predator doesn't get talked about enough, and it sits beneath everything else. The mission was a lie from the start. Dutch discovers this midway through the film. The hostages he was sent to rescue don't exist, or weren't the point. The CIA used his team to run an assassination under cover of a rescue operation, and Dillon knew the whole time while Dutch did not. The revelation lands quietly, almost without comment, because the Predator is already in the trees, and there's no time for anything else. What McTiernan does with that reveal is careful and specific. These men gave themselves to an institution, to a chain of command, to the belief that if you follow orders from the right people in the right direction, the mission carries meaning, and the institution used them, sent them somewhere more complicated and more dangerous than they were told, for reasons they were never given. The Predator didn't create the situation that kills these men. The Predator arrived after the situation was already broken. Something quietly devastating lives in that. You can be the most capable person in any room. You can execute everything you've been trained for with complete precision, and you can still find yourself in a jungle you didn't choose, hunting something that was already hunting you, because someone further up the chain made a decision you were never part of. Dillon earns a kind of redemption here, which is surprising given how the film positions him. He spends most of the story as the secondary villain, slippery and evasive and soft where these men are hard, and then, stripped of every illusion about the mission and his own capabilities, he turns around and faces the thing coming for them, knowing he won't survive it. "I know," he tells Dutch, "but maybe I can get even." It's the only completely unguarded thing he says in the entire film, and it costs him everything. The armor comes off everyone eventually. The question the film keeps asking is whether it comes off in time. That question, in particular, is why this film is exactly the right thing to watch on a night when you're worn out from performing. The exhaustion in Predator looks real because it was real. McTiernan shot in the actual jungles of Mexico, Palenque, Chiapas, and Puerto Vallarta, and the location did things to the production that no studio set could have replicated. Daytime temperatures ran above 90 degrees, humid enough that the thermal cameras initially couldn't distinguish human bodies from the background because everything registered at the same temperature. The crew had to spray trees with ice water and stand actors next to fires before each take just to make the thermal imaging functional at all. At night, the temperatures dropped far enough that heat lamps ran constantly. Just about every member of cast and crew got sick at some point, from contaminated water and bad food, from a hotel kitchen nobody trusted after the first week. McTiernan lost 25 pounds during the shoot. The line producer lost nearly 40. Schwarzenegger performed at least one scene with an IV line still in his arm, and if you watch him carefully across the length of the film, he visibly thins. The armor comes off him literally, not just symbolically. Gary Goldman, the military advisor McTiernan brought in to train the cast, flew to Mexico and immediately took the assembled actors for a run through the jungle to assess their conditioning. He looked at some of the most physically imposing men in Hollywood and watched them fall apart in the heat. Schwarzenegger pushed hardest to keep up. When they got back to the hotel, everyone quietly disappeared to their rooms without a word. Goldman's assessment was blunt. These guys are finished. They weren't finished, but what that run established, and what the whole shoot continued to build, was a shared experience of genuine suffering that McTiernan had specifically planned for. He wanted the cast to develop as a group by enduring something rough together, so the camaraderie on screen would already exist and not need to be manufactured. The result is that when Mac shaves in silence after the attack, or when the team moves through the undergrowth in that practiced wordless coordination, it reads as authentic because it largely was. These men trained together at 6 in the morning before the cameras rolled, got sick together, lost weight together, and sweated through impossible terrain wearing equipment that, as Bill Duke described it, weighed roughly as much as he did. The minigun Jesse Ventura carries was a real General Electric M134, not a prop, and it weighed over 50 pounds empty. He carried it through terrain that McTiernan later described as never flat, always on a hill, one leg up and one leg down, all day and every day. The jungle refused to cooperate with anyone's image of what they were supposed to be. And that was exactly where the film needed its characters to be positioned. The theme the film is built around, that performing strength is what makes you visible, what marks you as a target, was being lived out by the cast in the actual jungle at the same moment they were performing it on screen. They shipped gym equipment to Mexico in trucks, trained in the hotel ballroom before dawn, and maintained the impression of physical invulnerability even as the location steadily dismantled it. In the final weeks of the shoot, Schwarzenegger spent 3 weeks covered in cold mud, actual cold mud in an actual jungle, because the scene required nothing less. He won the film the same way Dutch won it, by shedding the image and working with what was actually there. Here's why you should watch Predator tonight, and it has nothing to do with nostalgia. The film understands something that most action movies quietly pretend isn't true, that performing strength is exhausting work, that it accomplishes less than advertised, and that the moment you stop performing, the moment you become just a person, cold and muddy and stripped of everything impressive, is sometimes the moment you become impossible to find. Dutch survives because he disappears, because he stops trying to be what the situation seems to require, and starts working with what's actually in front of him: mud, branches, silence, wit. 90 minutes of the film build him into an icon of 1980s invincibility, and then 20 minutes quietly take every piece of it apart. What's left underneath is still enough. That's the entire point. If you've come through a week of armor, of performing capability and composure and whatever version of strong you're supposed to be in your particular life, this film gives you permission to watch that performance fail spectacularly and still see the person underneath walk out of the jungle intact. Predator never announces what it's doing. The one-liners are still there. The minigun sequence is still extraordinary. The creature reveal remains one of the great moments in science fiction cinema, and you can watch the whole film as pure action and have a genuinely wonderful time without registering the layer underneath. That's how the best films work. They entertain you completely and leave something else behind, something that surfaces later, usually when you're not looking for it. You might find it during a week that starts to resemble a jungle, when every weapon you have is failing to connect, when something moves through your peripheral vision and you can feel it but can't name it. That's when this film finds you back. Watch it tonight, and if you've seen it before, if you know the creature reveal and the one-liners and the ending, watch it this time for Billy. Watch the moment he stops at the bridge. Watch what he drops, and watch what he keeps. What was the last thing you put down because you were tired of carrying it?